I wasn't the first. That realization arrived quietly without drama, which made it worse. I was reviewing old correspondence late one night, searching for anything that might ground me back in sequence, and I noticed the language patterns. Not what was said, how it was said. Shortened sentences, abrupt pauses in handwriting, margins that widened toward the bottom of the page, as if the writer had begun to fear running out of time rather than space. I started cross-referencing names, men who worked briefly at the Tedworth property, surveyors, tenants. One itinerant laborer brought over during the American expansion of the old legend, a drummer discharged from Colonial service, stripped off rank but not habit. Records were thin. Disappearances rarely announce themselves when the people involved are transient. But patterns remained. One man repeatedly froze mid-stride while crossing a road, not collapsed, stopped. Witnesses said he stood there, rigid, eyes unfocused, until his body simply failed him. Another was found seated upright in a chair, no signs of struggle, heart stilled between beats. Doctors called it natural. They always do when timing fails without violence. What connected them wasn't proximity, it was behavior. All had been described, shortly before their deaths, as precise, methodical, strangely calm. One account mentioned the habit of tapping fingers in sets of 4, then waiting. I became hyper-aware of my own hands after that. The beat no longer needed correction. My body had learned compliance too well. Movements felt smoother now, efficient, almost elegant. That frightened me more than the resistance ever had. I caught my reflection again and noticed how still I could remain without discomfort, how long I could hold my breath without panic. I wasn't being controlled anymore. I was being optimized. The house returned to my thoughts uninvited, not as a place, but as a reference point. A tuning fork struck long ago, still vibrating through everything that came after. I understood now why the drum had no skin. Skins wear out, bodies do not quickly enough to matter. Late one night, as I lay awake counting nothing, the beat shifted again. For the first time since leaving the house, it led. A subtle forward pull, not toward Tedworth itself, but toward something older, an origin point carried across the Atlantic, reassembled plank by plank in foreign soil. A tradition that had survived by adopting, by moving its instruments into architecture, into habit, into flesh. I knew then that if I returned to the house, it wouldn't be to observe. It would be to complete something, and I didn't know whether that meant the rhythm would finally release me, or whether it would decide I was ready to keep time for something else. I returned to Tedworth without deciding to. That's the only way I can explain it. There was no plan formed in my mind, no conscious conclusion reached. I simply found myself on the road, hands steady on the wheel, body moving with a confidence I hadn't felt in weeks. The rhythm had settled into something almost helpful, like a guide, like rails laid beneath motion. The house appeared unchanged. That was the first lie I told. Up close, I saw the corrections, angles that had tightened, beams that no longer bowed but leaned subtly inward. The structure had refined itself in my absence, adjusting to a standard it now understood better. The windows reflected me with uncomfortable clarity, every movement framed and timed, as if the house were rehearsing me before I entered. The door was closed. I waited before touching it. The beat waited with me. When I finally pushed inside, the house responded immediately, not with sound, but with synchronization. My steps landed cleanly, my breath settled, my posture straightened without effort. The disorientation I'd once felt was gone. I moved through the space like something designed for it. That terrified me. The back room was no longer empty. The drum had returned, not placed where it had been before, but centered, elevated slightly, resting on a low wooden stand that hadn't existed previously. The wood was newer than the house, but worn in the places that mattered, as if it had aged quickly under repeated use. Still no skin. I circled it slowly, aware that my steps no longer challenged the rhythm. The vibration began before I touched it this time, spreading outward in a controlled pulse that counted back instead of forward. Each beat seemed to subtract something: distance, resistance, hesitation. I realized then what the house had been doing. It wasn't teaching me rhythm, it was removing mine. I reached out. The moment my fingers brushed the rim, the room responded, not violently, not dramatically. The walls drew inward by degrees too small to register consciously, but large enough to contain. The ceiling pressed lower. The floor steadied itself beneath my feet, eliminating the possibility of imbalance. The beat intensified, not faster, deeper. I felt it in my joints, my teeth, the soft tissue behind my eyes. My own pulse began to stutter again, not from fear, but from confusion. It no longer knew which rhythm it was meant to follow. The drum did not sound. The house did. Every beam, every nail, every seam between boards resonated in unison, producing a pressure that felt like being inside a held breath that would never be released. I understood then why no one had ever described hearing the drummer clearly. There was no performer. The structure itself was the act, and I was standing at its center, measured, aligned, corrected, waiting for whatever signal came after counting reached zero. I don't know when the counting reached its end. There was no final beat to mark it, no dramatic cessation. The rhythm didn't stop, it resolved, like a calculation completing itself without ceremony. The pressure in the room eased just enough for me to notice the absence of resistance, and that the absence felt deliberate. The house had shifted, measuring. I stepped back from the drum and felt no correction, no tightening, no insistence. My foot landed where I intended it to land, and the floor accepted it without response. That terrified me more than when the walls had moved. Permission had been granted. The back room felt larger now, though I knew it wasn't. The walls hadn't retreated. My awareness of them had changed. They no longer leaned inward. They waited outward, like an audience that had seen enough to decide. I realized something essential then. The phantom drummer was not a presence that arrived. It was a function that activated when conditions were met. The drum wasn't an instrument of summoning. It was a register, a ledger, something that recorded when a body had surrendered its internal timing and could be trusted to hold another. I heard movement above me, not footsteps, repositioning. The beams overhead shifted, not from strain, but from intent. The house was rearranging itself subtly, redistributing weight, opening internal paths I hadn't seen before. Spaces between walls widened and narrowed like lungs choosing a new rhythm. I moved toward the stairs without thinking. Each step was effortless, no hesitation, no misalignment. I climbed as if I'd practiced this ascent many times before, my body predicting the rise and fall before my foot reached it. At the top, the hallway ended where it shouldn't have. The far wall had receded, revealing a narrow passage that hadn't existed earlier. The air inside it was warm and dense, carrying the faintest trace of oil and old wood, the smell of hands that had worked the same motion for too long. The beat returned there, once, low, final. I understood then what had happened to the others, why they hadn't screamed, why there were no records of resistance. The process did not require fear. Fear disrupted timing. Panic ruined precision. This required acceptance. I stepped onto the passage. Behind me, the house adjusted, sealing the space with a soft structural sigh, not trapping me, finalizing the configuration. The rhythm didn't press against my chest anymore. It moved through my spine, my shoulders, my arms. My hands twitched, not uncontrollably, preparedly. I could feel it now, the phantom motion, the echo of a practiced strike that didn't need an object to complete it. The rhythm wasn't ahead of me anymore. It was waiting for me to lead it. And somewhere deep within the structure of the house, something ancient and patient settled into stillness, confident that the beat would continue even if the drum never sounded again. I didn't resist what my body was doing. That detail matters. Resistance implies conflict, and there was none. My arms lifted with a smoothness that felt earned, not forced. Muscles aligned themselves as if responding to instructions memorized long before I was born. My wrists rotated slightly, adjusting for weight that wasn't there but should have been. The first strike never landed. There was no surface to hit, no skin stretched out over wood. And yet the motion completed itself with absolute conviction. I felt the impact through my bones. A dull, satisfying stop, as if something invisible had met my hands at precisely the right moment. The house answered, not with sound, with balance. The walls steadied, the ceiling relaxed upward. Somewhere deep below, beams shifted and logged into place. The structure wasn't reacting to noise. It was responding to correct timing. I struck again. This time, the beat traveled outward, not as vibration, but as instruction. I felt it move through the passageways I hadn't seen, through the rooms that no longer existed in any useful way. The house wasn't echoing me. It was taking cues. Images surfaced uninvited, not memories, but records. Men standing where I stood, hands raised, bodies tuned until individuality became irrelevant. Some wore uniforms, others rough work clothes, different centuries, same posture, same inevitability. None of them looked afraid. That was the final understanding. Fear had never been part of this. The phantom drummer was not a tormentor. It was a role, one refined through repetition, passed forward when the previous body failed or emptied itself of usefulness. The house did not consume people. It replaced components. My hands moved again, slower now, deliberate. Each motion felt cleaner than the last, efficient. The rhythm wasn't accelerating. It was settling, establishing a baseline that the structure could rely on long after my conscious thoughts dissolved. I became aware of something else then. The outside world, not visually, not directly, but as a distant interference. The irregular chaos of human timing pressed faintly against the house's perimeter. Footsteps, voices, clocks, wind, all of it imprecise, all of it wrong. My next strike corrected a fraction of it. I felt the adjustment ripple outward, dampening randomness, imposing a narrow corridor of order that extended farther than the property line. Not enough to be noticed, just enough to be effective. That's when I understood the true scale of it. The house was not isolated. It was an anchor, and I was no longer visiting. I was installed. Time stopped behaving the way it's supposed to. I don't mean it froze or fractured. That would have been dramatic, easier to recognize. Time simply began to behave itself. Hours moved with a smoothness I'd never felt before, as if they had finally been relieved of improvisation. I no longer slept in the way I used to. Rest came in intervals, efficient, restorative, precisely sufficient. My body woke without confusion, without resistance. Hunger arrived on schedule, fatigue departed when dismissed. Everything unnecessary was trimmed away. From inside the house, I became aware of disturbances beyond it, not screams, complaints. Neighbors noticed missed cues, church bells rang and felt wrong. A farmer down the road reported his livestock freezing mid-motion for brief, inexplicable moments before resuming as if nothing had happened. A child was scolded for standing too still for too long, eyes unfocused, counting on his fingers without knowing why. They didn't hear the drum. They felt the correction. Each time the disorder pressed too hard against the parameter, my hands moved, not violently, not urgently. Small adjustments, subtle strikes. The house absorbed the instruction and transmitted it outward, smoothing jagged timing like a hand pressed flat against wrinkled cloth. I began to understand the restraint my predecessors had shown, why the rhythm was never loud, why the beat was never continuous. Too much order draws attention. Precision must remain scarce to be tolerated. The phantom drummer did not dominate. It maintained. I no longer wondered how long I would remain. The question belonged to a version of me that required duration. The role did not. Bodies failed eventually. That was accounted for. The house would sense deviation, misalignment, inefficiency, and it would begin listening again. For now, though everything fit, I caught sight of myself once, reflected faintly in a darkened window. My posture was perfect, my breathing invisible. My face held no expression that required interpretation. I looked less like a man, more like a function that had learned how to wear one. And somewhere, beneath the floorboards, within the locked cadence of beams and joints, the house held steady, confident that the rhythm was correct, and that when it eventually faltered, someone else would hear the first beat. I don't know how much time passed before the house decided I was no longer optimal. There was no warning, no pain, no dramatic failure, just a subtle loss of efficiency, a fractional delay between intention and motion. My hands hesitated where they never had before. The rhythm noticed immediately. The correction did not come. That was how I knew. The house does not punish mistakes, it replaces them. I felt the beat recede from my chest first. My pulse returned, clumsy and independent, suddenly loud in my ears. Breathing became effort again. Thought reasserted itself, jagged and unnecessary. I understood with quiet certainty that I had been released, not spared, not rewarded, simply removed from function. The passage behind me opened without sound. I stepped backward, unsteady, by movements no longer anticipated by the structure. The walls did not lean, the beams did not adjust. The house had already begun listening elsewhere. By the time I reached the main room, the drum was gone again, not missing, transferred. Outside, the air felt wrong, too loose, too unmeasured. Wind moved without discipline. Sounds overlapped, collided, wasted themselves. I staggered down the steps, every footfall uneven, my body struggling to remember how to exist without permission. I did not look back at the house. I didn't need to. Somewhere behind me, I felt it, the faintest internal pressure, no longer centered on me, but passing through. The rhythm had found a new surface to test, a new body to measure, a new set of hands to refine. Later, long after I had left Tedworth behind, I heard reports. A tenant who complained of tapping sounds that didn't echo. A child who stood too still in a doorway, hands raised, wrists turning as if remembering something useful. A house that never screamed, never shook, never announced itself, but corrected. They will never call it the phantom drummer. Names make things seem singular, contained. This is not. It is a process that survived the crossing. A discipline that learned to inhabit food, then habit, then flesh. It does not hunt, it waits. Some nights when the world around me feels especially uncoordinated, I still feel it. A distant alignment, a correction made far away. Somewhere a house settles, somewhere a body learns timing it didn't ask for. And somewhere, very quietly, the beat continues.